Hi everybody. This lecture is for Chapter 7 in our Brimley text, which is looking at education as a state function. So we basically note in the quote for this particular chapter that education at the state level is a major role of the federal government. So the federal government has to regulate what happens at the 50 states, but it's evidently and obviously the state's responsibility to decide how money is spent, what programs are important, and what programs get the priorities. If you look at different things that the key concepts that we're going to be covering, I want you to look specifically at flat grants, foundation program, categorical aid, and rate bills. We're going to be talking about a little of these this week and then also in our Chapter 8 lecture as well. So very, very, very important to know that if you ask who has the power, who spends the money, in the state of Oklahoma, it's obviously at the state level. It is not the local government, and it is not the federal. It's not the federal input. Federal input has a say. Local input has a say. But in this state, the majority of funding does come from the state level funding. It's different in every state. All decisions in schools are made at each of the three levels, but most of them are made in this state at the state level. My belief is this is going to be taken away over the course of my career, your career, everybody else's career. It's going to change to federal. I don't see any way that it's not, but for now, know that your funding decisions, your curriculum decisions, your pretty much every decisions are state level decisions. So why do we have state responsibility in schools? Well, state responsibility in schools really came from the 13 colonies. Most people, when they settled in the United States, wanted their own freedom to essentially have their own government and their own obligations for education. And once again, this was a European concept. So because of that, we decided to have state-level funding and state-level control of education. We didn't want the federal government to tell what to do related to education. So we said in the Constitution with the 10th Amendment, and it holds true even today, that education is regulated at the state level with input from local constituents and federal constituents. But the foundations of education have to be state level, meaning that most of the funding comes also state level. So we have 50 decentralized school systems because of this. So there are advantages to this, and there are disadvantages to this as well. As somebody who does school finance, I was in a position where I was teaching school finance in Pennsylvania and Ohio, and I had to teach that slightly differently in each state. And now I'm in Oklahoma teaching Oklahoma school finance. So I'm teaching essentially 3 different classes when I teach anything related to school finance. It's difficult because what I do in a Foundations of Education class, I could do in any of the 50 states. But for finance, you have to know the states, you have to know what the responsibilities are at each level. So that's difficult. The same is the case with school law. You can't teach a school law class and say this is universal school law. It has to be Oklahoma school law. It has to be Pennsylvania school law. It has to be Ohio school law. So finance and law, the advantage is it's regulated at the state, but the disadvantage is it means that there are different controls, different concepts, different things like that. So school finance policies come from the Oklahoma School Boards Association. It's why we even have a text in this class that's from there. We have National School Board Association in the Council of Chief State School Officers, but they set the policies and the state determines which ones they want to adopt, which ones get higher priority, and which ones get lesser priority. So school finance policies are made with the Oklahoma School Boards Association. They're the ones that make the decisions. They say where the funding comes from. They say where the funding goes. So they have more responsibility than the federal government does, and that's important. The other thing that I note on here is that zoning and districting of schools is a state function. It is not a local function. It is not a federal function. That's also something that you have to consider and keep in mind. So land grants are supposed to provide funding and organization to schools, and it was done basically as a Reconstruction era thing in the Midwest and in the South. Oklahoma uses land grants very frequently. That we're essentially using our facilities in order to increase education, increase growth, and increase development. That's why you see in Oklahoma schools this concept of land grant missions. I mean, we see it at the university level, we see it at the K-12 level, we see it at community colleges. We're a land grant state, we're a land grant institution, and that's important here. So we're going to go over the 6 different developmental stages of school finance. I think this is important. This is definitely something that I would, can, and will put on a quiz. So local responsibility, we basically had local responsibility through the 13 colonies, but it came from church support, meaning that that's kind of where the locality of school finance came from, because you paid money to the church and in exchange you got an education, and you got education on how to read the Bible and how to use the Bible. Only those that could afford to go to school went, and that was the case with tuition charges. We all know that changed later on. The taxes then started in the southern state. They were concerned, the southern states, and when I say southern states, I want to stress this. We're talking the Carolinas down. We're not talking Virginia in this case. They were concerned with education for all. So only 3 of the states said education for all. And the rest of them were a select few that could possibly afford it. So early grants and early allocations. Basically in the 20th century we said 12 grades, 9-month structure for school. We all know that that's kind of evolved. We have pre-K has been built in, kindergarten has been built in, essentially creating what I call the 13th and 14th grade. You have 9-month structures, and now some states we have 12-month structures. All of us know that our jobs as educators are not 9-month jobs anymore. We're looking at really 10 and a half months in most school districts. State funding jumped in after local funding basically supported schools. When that happened, states said, we have more power now in education and we can make more decisions. So then we have the foundation program concept. This is a big idea. This means that the state does not fund the richest district. The richest district sets a foundation and a baseline. They only operate on local funding, and then we compare the other districts to where that richest district falls in. So the state kicks into the other districts. They don't ask the rich district to give to the poor, but the state uses them as a baseline. This started in New York, and it makes sense that it started in New York, because New York, if you look at any of the states and you look at educational inequality, we would all agree that New York probably has more than any other state. You have the richest of the richest, and you have the poorest of the poorest living all throughout New York. So this foundation concept is important, and it was a good equalizer in the programs. So then many professors and consultants and educational leaders, I was not one of them because this was way before my time, said that we needed to have equal distribution of wealth throughout the state. We needed full state funding for schools, and that the rich needed to give to the poor. As we've said in here, this doesn't go well in richer districts, and it's why we have the system we have now, which I like the system we have now. It is a check and balance system. The state can contribute, the federal government can contribute to different districts that need it, but saying that the rich districts have to give to the poor districts, especially with the sheer number of districts we have here, you know that that's not going to work, and I know that's not going to work. So, power equalization is partnership between both systems. The state fills in the gaps. If local districts want more funding, meaning they want a different athletic facility, they want additional transportation routes, they can fill in for their buildings, but they have to be able to provide for it on their own. And that is another big idea. So then now we have the biggest problem that we see right now in our school system. We're not really seeing this much in Oklahoma, and we have to stress this. We're a good state in terms of funding and in terms of federal control. We've kind of vetoed it in a lot of ways, but I was not seeing that in Pennsylvania. So we're actually in better shape for funding, I think, in Oklahoma than we are in Pennsylvania right now as I record this. If the state doesn't provide, the federal government steps in. And the federal government gives money, but then the federal government also takes autonomy away from the state, and it takes autonomy away from the local district. We all know how well that went with Common Core in the state of Oklahoma. it didn't, and that probably was a good thing because there was enough justification against it. So where is this happening? It's happening in urban school districts and some rural school districts. And when I say this, I'm not saying in Oklahoma, I'm saying in the United States. So Oklahoma is actually very equipped to handle funding for rural districts. You might not think that, and you might think in your mind, well, they need more money. Well, everybody needs more money, but trust me, compared to other states, we're better equipped for rural funding. Urban funding, we need more, but in rural districts, we are equipped for the funding. So, current finance programs and policies, the foundation approach is used in 45 different states. The flat grant is used in one state. That's basically everybody gets the same amount. Full state funding, the state has control. And then the combinations and programs and power equalizing systems, those are used as well. So where are we looking at? What are we doing? Well, I think it's important that you note that the combination tiered system is used in Oklahoma. It's good, it's balanced, but the good thing about a combination tiered system is that actually takes away power from the federal government. So if you don't want federal funding, we're in a good position to have a tiered system here. It's going to give more control to the state, but ask yourself when you're sitting as a superintendent, who do I want to be making decisions for my schools? Do I want it to be the federal government or do I want it to be the state government? And you can't say neither, you have to have one. My argument is this system lets it happen at the state level. That can be a good thing. So, everything is based on the state's ability to fund education. If the state does, the state will not take the federal suggestions into account. If the state can handle it, they're going to do it themselves. And any Department of Education is going to tell you that, and they're going to do it. But once they can't, other alternatives will be considered. And that's the big idea and the big concept from this section. If the state can handle it, they will. If they can't, then we got a problem. So that's it. That's the end of this chapter. Like I said, this was a pretty quick one. We do have to cover the federal stuff. I can probably get through that in 6 or 7 minutes because I'm basically going to be putting content on here where I say, if we were in any other state other than Oklahoma, blah, 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 blah. So keep that in mind as we look at it. So keep that in mind when we look through the next chapter. Thank you.